Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR official 24 channel. Kane's unexpected marriage proposal to Lily could bring them back together in ways neither of them ever imagined, not simply because the act of proposing signals a desire to reconcile, but because it forces both of them to confront everything that had gone unspoken between them for far too long, all the words lingering in the air like dust suspended in a single beam of late-day sunlight, everything they had once believed, hoped, fought for, and ultimately lost when life pushed them onto diverging paths they never intended to walk. The proposal itself, though sudden, was not impulsive. It had been forming inside Kane for months, slowly, steadily, as he revisited old memories that carried the weight of both joy and regret, memories of Lily laughing in the kitchen on Sunday mornings while sunlight spilled across her shoulders, memories of road trips where they sang until their voices cracked, memories of whispered confessions exchanged in the stillness just before dawn, memories that reminded him that what they had shared was rare, fragile, and worth fighting for no matter how tangled the threads of their lives had become. When he finally decided to ask her to marry him again, Kane understood he was not simply offering her a ring but offering her a chance to rebuild something that had been splintered, not shattered beyond repair, but fractured in ways that time alone could not mend. For Lily, the moment of the proposal arrived like a jolt, a collision of past and present. She had spent so long convincing herself that moving forward meant moving away from Kane, that holding on to their history was a kind of unnecessary suffering, a chain she needed to break to grow into her own identity. Yet when he looked at her with that familiar mixture of vulnerability and determination, when he whispered her name with a softness she had not heard from him in months, her resolve cracked like thin ice under a hesitant foot. She could feel, almost physically, the weight of everything they had been and everything they could still be pressing on her chest, not painfully but insistently, as if reminding her that love, even when bruised, has a way of lingering like a melody you can't forget. The truth was that the love between them had never disappeared, it had simply been buried under misunderstandings, emotional exhaustion, and the wounds inflicted by two people who cared so deeply that their missteps hurt even more sharply. And now Kane's proposal pulled all of that back into focus, forcing Lily to question whether the walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart were protecting her or merely isolating her from what she wanted most. She remembered the way Kane used to hold her hand when she was overwhelmed, steadying her breath with his own, remembered the long nights when they planned their future with absolute certainty, remembered the way he looked at her as though she was both a mystery and a miracle. But she also remembered the arguments, the resentment, the nights they slept on opposite sides of the emotional chasm that had opened between them. She knew accepting his proposal would mean reopening old wounds, but it would also mean reopening the possibility of healing, of rediscovering the tenderness that had once been the anchor of their entire relationship. Kane, for his part, knew the proposal would not erase their history. He didn't want it to. He wanted Lily to understand that he loved her not despite their past but because of it, because they had walked through fire and discovered that even when they burned each other, they still found ways to reach for each other in the smoke. He wanted her to feel the sincerity in his voice, to recognize that he had changed, not completely, not magically, but in the quiet, consistent ways that matter most. He had learned to listen more deeply, to apologize without defensiveness, to approach conflict with presence instead of panic, and he wanted to show her that the man standing before her now was not the same man who had let her slip away. The proposal was not a promise that they would never struggle again, it was a promise that he would choose her every time, even when it was hard, even when it required patience and vulnerability and work. Lily felt all of this swirling inside her as she stared at Kane, her thoughts tangled but strangely peaceful, as though a part of her had been waiting for this moment even when she believed she wasn't. She thought about the life she had built without him, a life functional but faintly hollow, full of accomplishments but lacking the kind of shared meaning she had once known. She realized that moving on had brought her stability, yes, but not the kind of joy that radiates from the marrow of your bones. And now Kane stood there, uncertain, hopeful, terrified, offering her a choice that was both simple and monumental, the chance to step back into the story they once wrote together, not to erase what had happened but to write new chapters with the wisdom of their scars. The ring he held was modest, not extravagant, and that made it even more powerful. It symbolized not a grand gesture meant to overshadow their issues, but a quiet promise rooted in honesty. She could see that Kane was trembling slightly, not out of fear of rejection but out of the sheer emotional magnitude of the moment, the vulnerability of laying his heart bare in front of the one person who could break it with a single word. Lily's breath caught as she contemplated everything that accepting the proposal would mean: forgiveness, trust, commitment, and most importantly, the willingness to walk back into intimacy. She knew she could say no, she could thank him for the gesture, acknowledge its beauty, and still choose the safer path. But she also recognized that fear had guided too many of her decisions in recent months: fear of being hurt again, fear of losing herself, fear of repeating patterns she thought she had outgrown. Kane's proposal illuminated something she had not wanted to confront: that love requires courage, and courage is never born from safety. As she considered her answer, she remembered the way Kane had once told her, "Love isn't about never falling apart, it's about learning how to put each other back together." Those words echoed through her like a forgotten truth resurfacing. She realized that perhaps the point was not to avoid the risk but to embrace the possibility that they could create something stronger than before, something resilient, forged from experience and shaped by sincere intention. Kane waited, his heartbeat pounding in his ears, hoping that Lily could see the sincerity in his eyes. He didn't need a perfect response, he simply needed her to understand that he was offering not just a proposal, but a bridge back to each other. Lily stepped closer, her emotions a tumultuous blend of fear, hope, nostalgia, and the undeniable pull of the love she had tried so hard to quiet. And in that moment, she finally understood that Kane's unexpected marriage proposal wasn't about recreating their old life, it was about inviting her into a new one, built intentionally, thoughtfully, and with a depth they had never known before. She saw that accepting his proposal could bring them back together in ways that honored their past while giving them permission to grow beyond it, creating a bond more mature, more grounded, and more profound than the one they had once shared. And as she reached for his trembling hands, she realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that carry us home. But even as Lily's fingers grazed Kane's trembling hands, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in a kind of emotional twilight where the past and future hovered like twin phantoms just beyond her reach, urging her to look deeper within herself before offering any answer at all, because despite the sudden serenity that had begun to form inside her chest, the truth was that a storm still churned beneath her ribs, filled with questions she had spent months avoiding. Kane felt her hesitation, not in the way she pulled back, because she didn't, but in the quiet tremor that moved through her hand, a subtle sign that she was balancing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and beautiful. That small tremor reminded him of the early days of their relationship, when Lily would reach for him shyly, before she'd learned that she was safe with him, before she'd grown confident enough to rest her full weight against his heart without fear of breaking it. He saw in that tremor not weakness but strength, the strength of a woman who had been wounded and was still willing to stand in front of the man who had hurt her, still willing to consider stepping back into a love that had once made her feel invincible. And Kane understood, with a clarity that made his throat tighten, that her decision, whatever it would be, would shape not just the contours of their future but the very essence of who they were becoming. Lily's eyes drifted to the ring again, but this time she didn't simply see its simplicity or the sincerity behind it, she saw the countless moments that had led them here, the late-night arguments that spiraled into misunderstandings, the silences that grew heavier the longer they lingered, the apologies whispered too late, the emotional exhaustion that had crept into their daily life until they barely recognized the lovers they had once been. She remembered how painful it had been to walk away, how she had clung to the idea that distance might give her the clarity she desperately sought, clarity she hoped would tell her whether what they had shared was still salvageable or whether it was simply a beautiful story that had run its course. But instead of clarity, distance had given her emptiness, a quiet, aching sort of emptiness that filled the spaces where Kane's presence had once lived. She missed the way he left notes for her on the refrigerator, little scribbles full of affection and inside jokes. She missed the way he would adjust the car seat for her automatically, knowing she always forgot. She missed the way he listened to her dreams with unfiltered sincerity, as though every idea she voiced was something sacred. It wasn't that her life without him was unbearable, it wasn't. She had built something steady, calm, composed. But in the quiet moments, she felt the absence of something electric, something deeply rooted, something irreplaceable. And now, standing here with Kane's proposal hanging gently between them, she felt that absence humming again, tugging at her like a familiar melody she'd tried to forget. Kane watched her with soft eyes, resisting the urge to speak, resisting the impulse to rush her, because he knew Lily needed space to process the magnitude of this moment. He had spent countless nights rehearsing what he would say if he ever had the courage to propose again, imagined speeches full of eloquent declarations and poetic confessions, but now he realized none of them mattered. What mattered was allowing her to feel everything she needed to feel. What mattered was giving her the room to come to him freely, without pressure, without expectation. What mattered was letting her know through his silence that he respected her, cherished her, understood her, even when he didn't have the words. Lily felt that silence like a gentle embrace, not heavy or suffocating, but supportive, almost soothing. It told her more about Kane's growth than any speech ever could. He wasn't trying to fix everything with a single gesture. He wasn't pretending that their journey back to each other would be effortless. He wasn't painting over their history with romantic platitudes. Instead, he was offering her something real, something imperfect but honest, something fragile but full of potential. And for the first time in a long while, Lily felt a sense of calm wash through her, a calm born not from certainty but from a kind of emotional clarity that she hadn't known she was capable of finding. She realized that love didn't require perfection, it required intention. It required choosing each other again and again, even after the shine faded, even when the world grew complicated. And Kane, in this moment, was showing her that he was ready to choose her not because he was clinging to nostalgia but because he genuinely believed in the future they could build. Still, Lily knew she couldn't accept lightly. She needed Kane to understand the depth of what she was stepping into if she said yes. She needed him to know that accepting his proposal meant reopening herself to vulnerability, to trust, to hope, and to the possibility of heartbreak. Because love, at its core, was always a risk, a leap into the unknown, and she needed to be sure that Kane was prepared to leap with her, not just now in the glow of reconciliation, but later, when challenges inevitably surfaced. She looked into his eyes, searching for that understanding, searching for the steadiness that had always drawn her to him, and when she found it, soft, unwavering, full of sincerity, her breath caught. In that moment, she saw not just the man she had once loved, but the man he was becoming. And it made her heart ache with a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. Kane saw something shift in her expression, subtle but unmistakable, and hope sparked inside him, warm and bright. He felt his chest tighten with emotion, but he remained still, knowing Lily was moving through her thoughts at her own pace, knowing she needed to arrive at her decision with both her heart and mind aligned. For a moment, Lily closed her eyes, letting memories wash through her, not to cling to them but to understand them, to see the full picture of who they had been and who they could become. She remembered the first time Kane told her he loved her, nervous, stumbling, sincere. She remembered the time he stayed awake all night nursing her through a fever, humming softly beside her. She remembered how deeply he cared, how effortlessly he gave, how fiercely he loved. Those memories didn't erase the pain, they coexisted with it, woven into the tapestry of their relationship. But now she could see them clearly, as part of something larger, something worth salvaging. When she opened her eyes again, Kane was still watching her, hope and uncertainty mingling in his gaze. She took a deeper breath, not to steady herself but to embrace the vulnerability of the moment. She knew her answer was forming, slowly, gently, like dawn spreading across the horizon. And though she hadn't spoken yet, Kane felt the shift too, felt the air around them warm with possibility. Lily stepped even closer, placing her second hand over his, surrounding the ring he held between their palms. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of everything they had endured and everything they could still create. She told him she wasn't ready to promise perfection. She wasn't ready to forget the past. But she was ready, deeply, sincerely, to try again. To rebuild. To choose each other with intention. She told him that if he wanted a marriage built on honesty, courage, patience, and understanding, then yes, she could see them walking that path together. Cain felt the world tilt, not sharply but beautifully, like a door opening to a room he hadn't known how badly he needed to enter. Emotion surged through him, relief, joy, love, and for a moment he couldn't speak. He simply pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as though he had just been given something priceless, something he vowed never to take for granted again. Lily melted into the embrace, feeling not just the warmth of his body but the warmth of the future forming around them, a future grounded in growth, in forgiveness, in choices made with intention rather than expectation. She felt the tremble in Cain's shoulders, felt the quiet sob he tried to swallow, and her heart softened even further. This was not a dramatic reunion filled with fireworks or cinematic declarations. It was tender, quiet, deeply human. And that made it even more real. When they finally pulled apart, Cain slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady now, his eyes shining with gratitude. The ring fit perfectly, not because it was flawless, but because it symbolized everything they were choosing, to rebuild, to forgive, to love again with open hearts. Lily looked at the ring, then at Cain, and smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. And Cain felt, for the first time in a long while, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. As they walked forward together, fingers intertwined, they both understood that the journey ahead would not be easy. But it would be theirs, honest, imperfect, beautiful. And it all began with Cain's unexpected marriage proposal, a moment that didn't just bring them back together but opened the door to a future stronger than anything they had known before. In the hours that followed their fragile but powerful reconciliation, Cain and Lily moved through the world with a gentleness that felt entirely new, as though every step they took together required a recalibration of their hearts, a relearning of rhythms that had once come so naturally but had grown unfamiliar during their time apart, and this soft reorientation brought with it a strange, shimmering beauty neither of them expected. They didn't talk much at first, not because there was nothing to say but because they both understood instinctively that words, despite their necessity, were secondary to presence in that moment. What mattered most was the quiet, the way their hands found each other without effort, the subtle smiles that passed between them like small, luminous secrets. Lily found herself studying Cain in a way she hadn't in years, not searching for flaws or old hurts but rediscovering the warmth in his eyes, the sincerity in his posture, the way he always tilted his head slightly when he was trying to listen not just to what she said but to what she meant. Cain, for his part, felt a cautious but profound sense of hope unfurling inside him, like the first green shoot pressing through winter-hardened soil, delicate yet determined. He knew they were stepping into something that required patience, honesty, and a willingness to grow both together and individually, and he silently vowed to honor every part of that process. Later that evening, when they finally sat side by side on Lily's couch, the same couch where countless arguments, reconciliations, and confessions had taken place, they talked, not with urgency but with openness, unwrapping their fears and expectations piece by piece. Lily admitted she was afraid of repeating old patterns, of being swallowed by the emotional intensity that had once defined their relationship, and Cain listened with full attention, resisting every temptation to jump in with solutions, simply holding her words as gently as he had held her hands earlier. She explained how independence had become both her sanctuary and her shield, how stepping back into a shared life, even with someone she loved, felt like an act of trust she wasn't sure she was ready to fully give, and Cain nodded, not dismissing her fear but honoring it, acknowledging that her growth during their time apart deserved respect. He told her about his own fears too, how he worried about disappointing her again, how he had spent nights agonizing over the mistakes he couldn't take back, how he had learned that love wasn't about grand gestures but about daily consistency, small acts of care, and the ability to show up even when insecurity whispered otherwise. Their conversation flowed slowly, gently, like a river learning again how to navigate familiar banks, and the more they spoke, the more they realized how much they had needed this quiet honesty, this space to unravel without judgment. At one point Lily brushed her hand against his arm, almost absently, but the touch sent a ripple of emotion through both of them, a reminder of how connection could be both grounding and electrifying at once. She saw in Kane's eyes a tenderness that made her chest tighten, a tenderness she remembered but hadn't felt from him in so long, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine their future, not as a fairy tale, not as a perfect sequence of harmonious days, but as a real, lived experience filled with shared effort, shared laughter, and shared healing. The idea